Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. The day after the elections in Israel, Mr. Netanyahu returned for a fourth time as prime minister as he forms a government. The surprise is that Mr. Netanyahu's success has led to disputes, harsh words, unfortunate choices of phrases by the Obama administration. Most recently in these last hours by the spokesperson at the White House, making accusation against the prime minister that are inappropriate, undiplomatic, and at this point you'd have to say mysterious, using the word flip-flopping for someone as resolved as Bibi Netanyahu is. Malcolm, it's almost flattery. Good evening to you, Malcolm.
Good evening. I don't think it's flattering. I think it's really outrageous. The comments are made despite Netanyahu's clarifications, which I'm sure our special guest has read and absorbed already.
Yes, we welcome Rob Satloff. Rob has served as the executive director of the Washington Institute for many years, and here we are, a moment to reflect upon the U.S. and Israeli relationship. Rob, a very good evening to you. The partisanship has never been part of this conversation. Malcolm has led me for many years to Israel and back, and I've talked to many guests, and no matter Democrat, Republican, or you'd have to say wandering around in between the camps, I've never heard either party express antipathy towards Israel in any fashion, and yet now I hear it, Rob. What is to be done? How can we recover from this? Good evening to you.
Well, good evening. I'm pleased to be talking with you. I will tell you that my own view, and you'll read about it in something I'm writing that will appear this weekend, is that it's time for an intervention in this dysfunctional relationship between the president and the prime minister. I hope that Israelis are talking to Prime Minister Netanyahu about the urgency of finding ways to work as well as possible with the administration over the next 20 months. I, as an American, am aghast at some of the actions and statements by senior American officials, jumping to absurd conclusions without checking the facts about Mr. Netanyahu's statements regarding the two-state solution. It was crazy to me, for example, that even before the president telephoned Netanyahu to congratulate him on his victory, White House aides were already briefing journalists about reevaluating our relationship and the peace process and considering going to the United Nations and validating that body as the place to define terms for the peace process, thereby ending 40 years of U.S. support for direct negotiations. If only someone in the White House had just called Netanyahu, had called Jerusalem, and asked him to clarify what his statements were on the peace process, all this could have been avoided. That's exactly what journalists did the next day, and by midday today, it was clear that Netanyahu did not say, no, never, two-state solution. He said, not today. Now, because you'd have to be crazy in the current environment to cede more territory. But if circumstances change, then that becomes possible. That's a reasonable position. But acting without checking, judging without the facts, is not befitting of the United States. My own view, there's a lot of water under this bridge, and the Netanyahu government contributed its own fair share to the sourness in relations at the highest levels. We have to be a major power, and we have to act judiciously. And I think we have acted injudiciously in the last 24 hours.
You raise many interesting points, but the fact is that it was the Prime Minister who initiated this clarification by holding, I think, 3 major interviews with American media in which he tried to clarify it. The press, of course, used it often to slam down, and maybe perhaps because they were reached by others. you're quite right about the early statements about reevaluating the relationship and this ridiculous idea of going to the UN and even now putting forward the idea about the 67 borders. You've just eliminated then the purpose of negotiations. You've made sure that never will be a peace process by the points that they raised. So
it's difficult to imagine that President Obama wants his legacy in the Middle East to be the death of the peace process,
of all of the peace
by
process.
Validating the institution, the United Nations, instead of direct negotiations as the way to achieve peace.
And so you now have the dual threat. One, that the Palestinians said, even the day before the election, that there are three choices. Either we go to the ICC, two, that we stop security cooperation, three, we collapse the PA, dump it on Israel and say it's your responsibility. And of course, inherent in that is going to the United Nations as well. And then now the United States. So you have a dual threat. And will not the Palestinians see this as a reason to be much more hardline, not to come to the table again as they did in the past when Barack offered them 90% and Olmert offered them 95%? All of this is lost.
Look, I would say without even going back to that history, to the best of my knowledge, the White House is still waiting for the president of the Palestinian Authority, for Mahmoud Abbas, to answer President Obama's very straightforward questions. It's a year now, exactly a year since last March when Abbas was in the White House. The president posed to him a set of questions, and to the best of my knowledge, he hasn't yet answered. But one doesn't hear any administration frustration at the Palestinians, but yet you get this remarkable outpouring of
vitriol
and vitriol at the surprise election victor in Israel.
Rob, is this about the election results, or is this about the Iran deal?
Look, I do think that this is the accumulated detritus of 6 years of very unhappy experiences. I think it culminated in the address by the Prime Minister to Congress earlier this month, an unprecedented moment of a foreign leader criticizing a president's foreign policy from the rostrum of the U.S. Congress. It's part of it is personal, but I think it's also deeper than that. That the gloves are off between Israel and more quietly Arab states who support Israel in this, and the United States in reaching the Iran agreement that you referred to.
But doesn't John raise an important point? What are the ulterior motives here? Because I think everybody would agree that the response is really unprecedented. I don't recall it. We never criticize Erdogan when he calls for the United States. Iran every day is making statements about today flying the flag on the White House. We will fight until this is coming from Khamenei's own representative, and yet not one word. And let alone the incitement even today from the PA, where they honored again the murder of 37 Israelis by a terrorist, and they honored this terrorist. Is this really disappointment at the outcome of the election, that the president was led to believe that this was going to have a different outcome, a party that he could exercise greater influence or somehow relate to in a different way, and feels that he was betrayed either by those who advised him, because you had a lot of Obama people, former associates, campaign associates, working in this campaign against Netanyahu?
Look, it may very well be that. I try to avoid psychoanalyzing the leaders here. It is just apparent that the administration is investing all of its diplomatic eggs in the basket of an Iran nuclear agreement, and has done absolutely nothing to allay the concerns of our allies, especially Israel, but not only Israel, our Arab allies as well. And instead, and partially because of that, and not surprising that Israel and other states are warning about the dangers of this emerging deal. This threatens the most significant administration achievement. The Congress speech, if you take away the sort of environmental issues, speaking on behalf at the invitation of the Republicans, and you just look at the substance, Netanyahu was quite right. He raised all reasonable questions How is it that these negotiations morphed from preventing Iran to only managing Iran's nuclear program? Doesn't Iran's terrorism and lust for regional dominance have an impact on the terms? Now, all these are very reasonable questions, but the White House doesn't want to address them. Instead, we saw today the White House spokesman critiquing flip-flopping in an election of a foreign leader.
Something never happens in America.
Robert Satloff is the executive director of the Washington Institute. Malcolm Hoenlein, Conference of Presidents, Major American Jewish Organizations. I'm John Batchelor.